Div, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. And as I mentioned, when we were in the sort of green room, I really resonate with your work. The mindful approach, I think, is something that you're starting to see now more broadly implemented in business. People have been talking a lot about conscious workspaces and conscious leadership and these sort of things. And if you look at it, it's almost like, at least in my interpretation, it's the implementation of ancient wisdom
Mhm.
into our modern workspaces, which I have to say is more needed than ever in today's world. So, again, thank you so much. Why don't you take a quick second to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background, and maybe like what inspired you to take this approach, and is this something that you've always sort of done in terms of the approach within your business world?
A lot has happened, I think, in the past 4 years, and a lot of self reflection allowed me to create the space for mindfulness in how I think about things, how I operate at an individual level and at a team level. And that's where I think I'm a big believer of bringing conscious leadership, authentic leadership into the mix because the time is now for it. I, as a product marketing leader, have realized that there's so much we could do, and there's so little time, never enough budget or resources. So, how do we make sure that we are being mindful of each other, being mindful of the teams that we work with? And I go with the CEO mindset. So, this is about curiosity, empathy, and openness. And if I can bring that into my work day to day, I think I am working in creating those relationships and fostering those relationships that can help build trust and credibility along the way. So it's all about that winning together.
Hmm. I love that. CEO. That makes total sense to me. Well, let's dive into this concept of winning together in one team. And you have a great blog. So, for everyone out there, definitely check it out. We'll go ahead and post the link to the blog here when we share this. But if you're a product marketing leader out there, how do you apply and how do you embody this framework?
It all starts with your core values and beliefs. And when I had the first time chance to become a leader, I started asking the question, what kind of leader do I want to be? And I was very fortunate to have a fearless leader who would be there right with you as you're taking those big leaps of faith. Someone who believed in you more than you could believe in your own self. And that, I think, changed how I started thinking about leadership. And I started thinking about what does it mean to be one team. And so, in the values that we created as a team, the first value was inspire. So, this was all about building that trust and credibility. And I knew doesn't matter if I've been in the company for 3 months or 3 years, if I cannot build that trust and credibility as new team members come in and go, as new team leaders come in and go, I need to be able to establish that credibility from the get go. If I don't have that trust, doesn't matter what I can do and what awesome work I do, it'll all start falling apart. And so that became very critical for me. The second was about influence, and this is all about extreme ownership. So if you've read the Navy SEAL book about extreme ownership, it ties to the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I was like, I like that. Like, that's what I want to be thinking about. And as product marketing, we are in so many different projects at so many different times. You're putting on multiple hats, literally and figuratively, and to putting out fires pretty much, right? And so if I can go from one context to the other and still make sure that I'm owning the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? It's not me saying, oh, I did my job, but so and so didn't do their job, or this team didn't do. It's not going to help anybody, right? So it's
Mm,
the we win or lose together.
mm,
It was one of the most beautiful things that I heard from a leader, and I was like, I'm going to hold that through my career because it is true. If together we are not winning, if together we are losing, then it's a loss for everybody, right? So I want to get to a win-win state where collectively as a group we're figuring it out. And the third part amongst those values were about the impact. And oftentimes, as organizations, we are all about results, results, results. As important as it is, when I look back at my decade long career, it's the relationships that I've built, right? I'm very proud of my recommendations that I have on LinkedIn for a good reason, because when I have a down day or something's not going right, I look at those recommendations. That's a reminder that there are things that we have done right. And you need that support system to help take you wherever you are today and where you want to go next. So that's how I think about when it comes to winning together.
I love that. And I know that people really can feel that when you're a leader who embodies that approach, you're just going to get more productivity. You're going to have a more pleasant time. Your team is going to stick around, right? Also, and you're just going to see the results. And I think that this is one thing that I've seen over time within the fast paced business environment that gets just thrown out, right? Especially when things get tough, right? Everything is cool when the company's growing really fast, or revenue is where it needs to be, or you've raised a lot of money and things like that. But in the same way, to maybe apply a mindful sort of
Mhm.
topic, or a lot of I would say, I've heard this, I should say it this way, I've heard this a lot in like Buddhism, right? The idea that thoughts are fleeting, that
Mhm.
joy and happiness are things, they're fleeting, right? They come and go, and that's okay, right? That's part of the course of nature. And the good times will come and go within an organization,
Yeah.
and there will be challenging times. And when you have those challenging times, it's like almost like clockwork. You start to see
Mhm.
people tense up. They start to behave in ways that are communicated mean or rude or impersonal, and these sort of things. And I think if you haven't built that foundation with your team in a very authentic way, right? Boy, you just see
Mhm.
teams and companies fall apart very, very fast, and sometimes very slow, but
Mhm.
this very dreadful experience that really drags people through the mud. And so, for the leaders out there, I really resonate with this concept. And if you don't want to get into maybe more spiritual or philosophical sort of wording, you can think about it as a strategy as well. It actually works, right?
It does, yeah. And that's where I think my path shaped, because even today, the teams that I talk about, they're still with me whether I'm with the company or not. And that, I think, is a testament to the relationships that we build, and that irrespective of whether you're still in the same team or you have moved on, who are the people that are still championing for you and who are still rooting for your success. That's a good path for sure. And it's also, can you sleep at night with a good conscience? And I think it's important for me to be able to make sure that I feel like I did the right thing today. And not every day is going to be an awesome day, and not every day is going to be me making all the right decisions. But at the end of the day, did I do what I could with the context and the reference that I had at that point in time? I think that's what it all comes down to, right? As organizations, right, it's probably easier said than done. As companies grow, that sense of one team can quickly dismantle.
Mhm.
It's not intentional, but it's part of growing up. And you and I, and we talked about this even with what you are all doing. It takes a lot of time and effort to shape that winning together mindset and to be one team across product sales and marketing.
Why is it, Div, that we tend to default to this separation between our personal life and our business life? And we believe that to be true. Like,
Mm.
people literally say, there's my personal life, there's my business life, they're separate. For me, I've never been able to do that effectively. And I think it's largely, at least because I'm being authentic and honest with myself,
Mhm.
that like
Mhm.
it's the same person, right?
Yeah.
Now, are you able to sort of mm, divide the emotions and maybe sedate him, or that's the best way. I'm just trying to come up with some way to really articulate it, because
Mhm.
it's not like like you really are able to do that. I mean, how many times do people come home from a rough day and they let this stuff out on their family at home, right? It's just a matter of like the transfer of energy and how you're actually managing that. And so in some cases, denying that these things do overlap and they bleed into different areas is almost like not having that awareness that
Mhm.
it's the reality is almost kind of detrimental. Would you agree with that?
I would, and I think it took me a long time to figure out that there is one me, and there are many parts of me, but it's not just let me put on my work mask and then let me put on my personal mask. And the way I would think about it is, have you ever joined a company where you feel like you belong and that you're part of this dream team, right? Like, I think I've been very fortunate in my career to experience both the teams where you're supporting each other, where you're bringing the best in each other. We may have different perspectives and diverse perspectives. We may contradict and challenge each other, but we know we are in it together, right? That feeling is what I think I've been very fortunate to have. And in today's world where there's so much competition, where it feels like everyone's out to get a slice of the pie, it can be a dream. and and where it gets difficult is not necessarily about the organization or the company, but it's more about, are we all working towards the same goal? Are we
Mm-hmm.
all working towards making sure we have shared OKRs, right? Objectives and key results, or are we stepping on each other's toes and trying to one up each other? That I think is where we tend to put on this work mask and be like, oh, this is what I'm expected to be, and this is how what I'm expected to do and act like. But the real authentic us is somewhere in the middle. And so
Mm-hmm.
once you can uncover that, I think we can shape the corporate world and corporate organization in a better way. And that's where I think well-being and making sure you're bringing all these aspects is important, because companies need to be held accountable for employee satisfaction, just like we talk about customer satisfaction, right? There's enough data out there today to say one of the biggest stress factors for an individual's life is work. There are reasons for it, but if we can help cultivate the right environment and create and foster an environment where everybody feels safe, they feel like they belong, we will have the best productive year and everything else that along the way. So that's where I focus on that cross-functional collaboration, because us as product marketing, we can do all the work in terms of creating the content, in terms of understanding the buyer persona, in terms of putting all the 9 yards that we need for getting a product launch and a go-to-market launch ready. But if you don't have those synergies, and if you don't have the bridges that you need to build along the lines of product sales and marketing teams, everything is just going to fall apart.
Yeah, and we see it happen all the time. I I can't help but to have this discussion with you and
Mhm.
think about human condition topics,
Yep.
right? Yes, we're talking business and
Mhm.
I have co-founder here, my title, and you have product marketing and we're professionals and all that stuff. I just don't know how we solve these things if we're
Mhm.
not solving the root,
Yep.
right? These root causes, which are human condition things, right? How many
Mhm.
times, even within ourselves, like I'm far from perfect, and that's okay. I have to tell myself a couple times a day that that's okay. But if we don't address it, if there's no awareness about this, if there's no
Mhm.
open conversation about this, then I think companies can suffer from it, right? But how do you have this almost existential human condition
Mhm.
conversation within a workplace and people buy in and believe that it is something that should be discussed in a work environment, even though you and I know that, especially these days, I am in my home right now. I have
Yeah.
not worked in an office in many years, even before
Mhm.
the events of the last couple of years. I was still remote working most of the time, right? And so that separation, really, from at least a space perspective,
Mhm.
is a lot is a lot is a lot thinner, right, than ever
It is.
before, right? And so back to my question, like,
Mm.
how do we solve these things if we're not having these discussions, and how do we make it okay to have these discussions and have the very top,
Mhm.
that executive leadership team buy in. Because if it's not bought in there, it's just a matter of time, right? Like, I've been part of great organizations where at the team level there was really great synergy and we were having these discussions and there was a lot of high EQ, but at the
Mhm.
very top it seemed to default back to a very old school way of thinking, a
Yep.
very rigid, a very cold, you
Mhm.
know, the stereotypical stuff that we experience all the time when we see, right? It's like
Yep.
almost like in the movies. I always think about the Wolf of Wall Street, or back in the 80s, the Wall Street, it was like, oh, cut people. It's all about money. That
Mhm.
at some point that those things fall apart.
They do, and I think you're touching on something very fundamental, right? To be human is to realize that we are not perfect, and for us to what it means as a business and what it means to scale a business. And if you don't have that alignment of whether you call it authentic leadership or conscious leadership at the exec level, doesn't really matter what you can do. And that's also been some of the areas where you start seeing those toxic environments, and you feel stuck because you're like, I'm doing everything for me and my team, but I can't push through the wall. I'm literally against the wall, and I can't do anything beyond that, right? So then you have to make conscious choices to be like, hey, is this the environment you want to be in, where you're barely surviving, or do you want to be in an environment where you thrive? And the organizations and companies and teams that understand that are at that level of awareness where they know where the gap is, and they are looking at making it better, and they're taking the steps, the hard decisions to be like, hey, something is not working in this part of the organization, let's fix that. That takes a lot of bravery.
Mm.
It can change the dynamics in a big time, and sometimes that's what you need, right? When you're in that scale go 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 mode, it's hard for us to see that. But I've been fortunate to see organizations and leaders who are taking that step to say, hey, I know this is a core area of focus, and this is what will take us to the next level. And I'm not expecting for results to happen in the next quarter. It could be a long term plan and a long term play for us. But we are in this together and we're going to make it work. And I think that's the big shift that you're starting to see more and more of. And even folks like us, we are saying, hey, we're not okay with being brought into a role and then being told, okay, this is what we want you to do, and that's it, right? Don't think outside the box, don't think beyond what your task is, what your job is. And we are like, no, we want to make it a better place. We want to be more productive collectively as an organization, not just individually as one person or as a team, right? That collective intelligence, I think, is a big part of that shift that's coming for sure.
I've heard a lot over the last couple years, and Eckhart Tolle. Are you familiar with
Mm-hmm.
Eckhart Tolle? Yeah.
Yep.
So for the folks out there, Power of Now. There's quite a
Mm-hmm.
few books. I have a couple of his books here and behind me. And one of the things that Eckhart Tolle talks about is, which I love, is the idea that we as individuals have to shift our awareness, our consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
right, to be able to impact the whole. And so if I think about that, and I think about this conversation that I had recently with a executive level individual, I sort of opened up about this idea of micromanaging, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we hear this all the time. For the folks out there, look around. If you listened to conversations across every organization on planet Earth, there are not like a million endless variations, in my opinion. They're
Mm-hmm.
very specific stuff they're just going over and over.
Yep.
Micromanaging, this person's a jerk, all these sort of things, right? It's the same sort of stuff. At least that's my observation.
Mm-hmm.
And if we looked at the micromanaging as an example of this situation that happens, it's really easy. And I say this because I've been the blaming person, right? I've been
Mm-hmm.
that individual who's blaming the other person, the other manager, the other individual, etc., multiple times. And it was only until I made a shift
Mm.
that I didn't solve it completely, right? I'm not suggesting that, but there was this more awareness of like what was actually happening, at least within me, right?
Mhm.
And it was less about blaming the other person, but actually
Absolutely.
looking in and going, well, gosh, what's actually going on within me?
Mhm.
Or, oh, there that thing goes again, right?
Mhm.
So back to this example, when you're in this environment where maybe you're interpreting or you're experiencing this thing that is obviously causing you discomfort and an unpleasant experience or
Mm.
feeling or emotion, etc., and then you're saying, gosh, this individual's micromanaging me.
Mm.
What if it was something that was being triggered inside of you
Yeah.
by this external stimulus, right?
Mhm.
Which is
Mhm.
this individual.
Mhm.
And what if we looked at ourselves and said, hey, gosh, what can I do to soften that inside of me, as opposed to always pointing to someone else? And this, you're talking about a level of mastery that is like Yoda, very difficult stuff. So I'm not suggesting that
No,
I.
it's self mastery to an extent, but it's also building the consciousness to look within, right? I think Eckhart Tolle and Thich Nhat Hanh and all the mindful leaders out there have said it's all about change is within me. As much as you want to change the person on the other end, that's not going to happen. Like they have to be open to that change and willing to make that step to the change. So all I can do is, yes, I will have people and I've had unfortunately some leaders like that where I struggle to be like, why are they being the way they are? And it took a lot on me. It took a big toll on me to realize I'm spending my energy in the wrong place. I'm spending the energy in an environment where it's just taking me down. And I started asking the question on, okay, what can I do in the environment that I am in? And this is where I talk about the sphere of influence, right? So it's I'm a big believer of workplace well-being, and I know what my sphere of influence is and where I can actually contribute, whether it's with my mentees, with my students, with the teams that I am part of. And that's the sphere of influence that I have. Do I want to make big change happen? Yes, but I also believe in the butterfly effect, where a small change can have fluttering effects across the globe. And so that's where I champion. And when I'm working on whether it's a go to market or a product launch, there are so many teams that are interlinked, and to make this all happen across product sales and marketing, that connection is important, right? And as humans, we may think we have got all the answers, or we may think that we know what needs to be done. But when you bring that collective together, I think that's where the power is, right? Each team member has a role to play. They have a strength that they bring in to make this dream team, if you will. So that's where I think going back to the cross functional collaboration that it comes back to.
Awesome. Well, let's talk a little bit about content and
Hmm.
the buyer journey.
Hmm.
Although I love the topics we've been discussing here, I could talk about this
They're all
for
interconnected.
forever,
So
right?
I'm good. Yeah.
For sure. I mean, I just keep thinking about all these concepts that
Hmm.
that I've been learning about in really the last couple years,
And
and
there's a
actually,
really good one that I just finished called Mindsight, if you have come
mm,
across it, by Dr. Daniel Siegel.
okay,
He is
mindsight.
the Mindsight, yeah, and it's the idea that you're raising this awareness, and you are able to get past the voice in your head telling you that you don't know what you're doing, and then realizing that you're making that path for awareness. So it's a
Mm,
very interesting book, and it walks through this personal transformation and the science behind it. And it's also I think he's the founder or co-founder of the UCLA Mindfulness Awareness Research Center. So
mm.
yeah, definitely check it out.
All right, I'm gonna add that one. I just finished the Presence Process by Michael Brown, which was
Very cool.
really fantastic. And one of the things that, as you were, you know, articulating your thoughts here, that kept coming to me was this idea of oneness, right? We
Hmm.
are all connected. And I know some people who are listening to this are like, "Oh, I thought we were listening to a go to market podcast," but I think these are important topics.
Mhm.
And the fact of the matter is, if you do look into these things, and I encourage folks to look into this kind of thinking, whether it's in a religious format, or a philosophical format, there's always things to kind of derive from this, some insight that hopefully give you some tools. But this oneness concept really like stood out pretty profoundly to me, because it was also very logical.
Mm.
Is this idea that we're all connected at an energy level, right? And I've been in rooms before where I have felt someone looking at me and then turned around and caught them and going, "Oh yeah," like we've all experienced that. We've all thought about someone and then we get a phone call from them, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
That's all happening all the time. And what I realized was, boy, there is a connection, right? And this idea that we are a cell within a much larger organization,
Mhm.
right? Uh, is
Mhm.
something that's very logical. And so, if a cell in your body is not doing well, it starts to affect the other cells around
So,
it, right? And so
yeah.
in our communities, we've seen this time and time again, where we try to isolate problem areas, and what happens, it's
Mm.
just a matter of time before
It
it,
spreads.
it trickles over into the rest of
Mhm.
the community in some way or the other. And so I think this idea of being responsible for your energy within
Mhm.
your organization, within you being that cell, is a really important thing. Now, do you do it alone? I don't know that it's something you can do alone, right? But you do have to, in my opinion, take responsibility, and it's not an easy thing, right? And so
Mhm.
for the leaders out there, really dive into this stuff. I just encourage everyone to do so, just because it's not only good for you, but it's
Mhm.
absolutely going to impact your organization in a more positive way. And if you're at a startup or some sort of like high risk environment, at least if it doesn't work out, at least you are having a more pleasant time going through that journey, right? And so I think that's important. But anyways, let's go back to the content question that I had. From your perspective as a product marketer, how should we be thinking about content and the buyer journey?
I think they're all very interconnected. And every time I think about the buyer journey, right, you have the different levels of the funnel or the flywheel, whichever model you take. The buyer journey is intended to give us a lens into the world of the buyer. How do they perceive things? Where do they get educated from? Where do they learn? What else is out there? What options are there for whatever challenge or problem that they're trying to solve? And so content plays a very intricate role in providing that education, that awareness. So discover, learn, try, buy, and then the advocate phase, right? Like those are the 5 steps that I think about when I think about the buyer journey. And in that discover phase, it could be things like your blogs, maybe short 1 minute videos, like raising that awareness, giving them the content for that. In the try and buy phase, right? This is part of your story where you're creating that trust, where they're like, oh, you're saying you can do X, but can you really do it? And this is that validation that you're getting. So this could be product demos, this could be webinars showcasing maybe some customers who have been able to do something similar. And then you go into that buy phase where now you're thinking about customer reviews, you're thinking about analyst reports, testimonials, videos where they have made the decision, it's between you and some other player in the market, but they're not 100% there, right? So this is the last final push that's going to get you to that last mile. They make the decision to buy. Now these are folks that you want to focus on, who you can then convert into becoming your customer success advocates, right? These are the ones that are super excited about what you have as a product, as an organization, right? It's not only the product, it's the organization, your customer service team. Everything comes together into that success story. And so if you can bring those in, then you're creating more of that flywheel, if you will. And that's where the connection between content and buyer journey is. And it's an important one, because if we are not paying attention to that end to end experience, we could say something on the web page and be totally opposite, and your customer's gonna churn, right? So
Mhm.
those are important, and to think about content that can help shape that narrative and that guideline is where I like to focus on when I'm creating content.
Awesome. Dave, thank you so much. I got to say, I had such an incredible time talking to you today, and I feel like we could talk for hours on this topic.
Validity, yeah.
If folks want to follow you on social media or dive into your content, what are the best URLs or channels to reach you?
Absolutely, yeah. So I do. I'm on LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn. Would love to connect with all of you, and just reach out. Right, we are all going through the same challenges and struggles together. And I say product marketing is part therapy, part us understanding each other. So please build that empathy. Right, when you share your experience, you can foster those connections and relationships, and not just within your team or your company, actually around the world, because I've been able to build those relationships with people who are passionate about marketing, just like we are. So, really, thank you so much for this opportunity, and I'm glad that I was here.
Awesome. Well, have a wonderful day.
Thank you all.